Alrighty, hello everyone. It's here. It's day 3. It's our first big batch of corpse spoilers, and I'm here with 3 fantastic guests: Mondi, Wentagon, and wowarlok. Uh, Here to talk about 4 fantastic new and exciting corp cards. I'm going to have them all introduce themselves as is typical for Daily Cast. So, Mondi, I'll start with you. Can you introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about when you started playing?
Um, yeah, sure. Hopefully, people recognize my voice. That means that you've been watching the accelerated meta test for the past couple of months. I'm a dedicated player as of System Gateway initial release. Been, if not playing pretty frequently, following very frequently, and you said to keep it brief as to how hype we were about any spoilers that had already happened. So that's just going to be my comment on the spoilers thus far.
Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to always call you Hank, but Wentagon, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Of course. So, hey guys, I'm Hank. I know Jeff from the Boston Meta, where I have been participating. Well, I guess since we um, had COVID restrictions lifted a little bit, but I picked up the game not seriously in 2020 when I think Geist was still legal. You'll have to check me on that. But started playing more seriously when Gateway came out, which was 21, I think. World 21 was my first world. So, like, about 2 years. I think of myself as maybe a spikier player, even if I don't necessarily have the results to show for it. But yeah, super excited about the spoilers. I'm glad Shaper's getting new toys. Can't wait to see more of them. Hope they're good again.
we, I am certainly on that camp as well, so we'll see. And wowarlok, do you want to introduce yourself? Last but most certainly not least.
Definitely. Hello, everyone. I'm wowarlok. I'm an Italian player. I started playing back when the revised core set was released, I think. And I like to say I'm one of the few people who regularly plays Eternal. So come play Eternal, people.
Yeah, we had a great match yesterday, right? Of
Yeah,
IG versus Wizard and Op versus what were you playing runner side?
I think I was on Wizard as well.
Yeah. Well, that's a Wizard problem, I think, but that was an interesting match. I had some people looking over my shoulder screaming at me that I was doing all the wrong things in the IG matchup. So I got very lucky there. Yeah, I guess, we talked very briefly, but, are you guys enjoying spoiler season so far?
Spoiler season is Christmas in July for me. I love it.
They call it
I
Scoopsmas for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. No evidence of any ARGs yet. I would be shocked if there isn't one, and I can't wait to let smarter people than I figure it out.
That's the strat, right? Um, cool. Well, I mean, you guys all said you were excited about the cards we were going to be talking about today, so maybe instead of vamping for a bunch of minutes, we should just start with the first card. This is Ataya. It is IP recovery, as it's I always forget the term for this. I'm going to call it subtitle. It is a Jinteki identity subtype division 4515, and it has the text limit to remote servers. The first time each turn you install a card in the root of or protecting a remote server, you may install one card from HQ in the root of or protecting another remote server, ignoring all costs. You cannot score the second card this turn.
Caveant fugitivi. Fugitive beware.
Well,
Fugitives.
that is
Um,
cool. I'm glad someone knows what that means.
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, the obvious comparison is ASA Group, right? This is pretty similar text. I think obviously some notable differences. Ignoring all costs is important as soon as you start stacking ice on a server. And I think the other interesting part is this doesn't have the non-agenda stipulation that ASA, I'll never know how to pronounce that, has. But I think, sacrificing your ability to use this on centrals lets you be a little bit more flexible with how you use it on remotes. And I think that opens up some interesting play patterns for this that'll separate it a little bit from ASA Group.
Yeah, it's important to say that the difference between us and this is that you don't stock the same server as you do in Asa, so you don't protect what you're installing. You don't put an upgrade and a card in the same server. So if triggering this efficiently means you have to have 2 cards that you want to play in your 2 servers, and that will be the puzzle to figure out how to build a Ataya deck, I think.
Yeah, I see someone in the chat just noted the artwork too. I'm pretty sure all of those people are the same people. I think it's clones hunting clones too, which is some great Blade Runner flavor there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd love to mention about the art. Marlon Ruiz, this got to do both of the identities being premiered today. We'll see the NBN one in a little bit. Has done 2 cards before this, Osman Pudlat and Hybrid Release. And now they have gone to doing 2 Corp agenda arts, and they are both fantastic.
Yeah, I think it is worth noting this is the first, I think, Corp ID that pictures people on it and not scary building. I'm certainly a little mixed on it, but I will say this piece, it slaps. It's really quite good. I think Marlon did a great job on this.
Yeah, the curl palette also is very interesting. It moves away from the typical red Jinteki that we've seen a bunch of times, and there's this light blue that's still like equally as threatening, I think.
Yeah, the very kind of clinical blue.
Yeah, exactly.
I also want to highlight Whiteblade's comment. The idea that clone hunters are called IP recovery, intellectual property recovery, is so evil. The flavor in the set already, we're like day 3. It's out of the park. If you'll humor me, I have to real quick. Shoeflower's been doing a phenomenal job with these pieces. I'm loving them. This really stuck out to me. Okay, so here's the thing about hunting psychics. You got to cast a real wide net and close it slowly and gently so that one day they try and see their future and every avenue is a dead end. That is such a good encapsulation of Netrunner, of card games, of dueling games. Like the forking that is inherent to Netrunner is just represented 100% in this sentence. And I just woo.
Yeah, all the lore articles have been spot on.
Yeah, it's very cool. So I think
I think
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, obviously the art and everything is great. When I looked at this though, my question was like, this obviously this is good, but I don't know if I figured out what I'm gonna do with this yet. I think that you can certainly build this glaciary because of the fact that you're probably saving, 5-6 credits on installs alone, let alone clicks. But I think, we don't know what Jinteki Ice is gonna look like if we get more pieces, but losing DNA Tracker, I mean, at least for Ag Infusion, that's a huge part of why it can command kind of a little bit of the early game for, not having your breakers down and not really being able to face check that. And so I don't know if you can, rely on having as much time to get yourself set up. So maybe you do need to rush with this. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot about how much, like, when you think about a lot of classic Glacier strategies, it's like, I'm going to play my agendas, I'm going to play my Rashidas, I'm going to play my NGO fronts, and maybe like 3 defensive upgrades, and then everything else is going to be ice or econ operations. And so Ataya is going to ask you to mix up that formula a little bit. Probably put more cards that you can install, and maybe even leave. Like, it's this weird mix of things where it's like you're going to want to have cards that you are okay with leaving in your second remote, and then also the ability to cycle cards through that second remote quite a bit so that you can keep getting those free installs.
Yeah,
Totally.
I would expect. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was saying I would expect like some of the more common assets that usually go unprotected, like let's say spin doctors or even like NGOs that you're willing to just use not as bait but just as basic economy. Those are very good cards to trigger the ID with very few cost and keep building your maybe main remote, keep stacking eyes, keep fast install, like install an agenda in there, install a defensive upgrade in there, and the value up.
And just quickly,
absolutely.
Balramu was asking, how does this work with mitosis? Not well is really the answer, I think. Because mitosis says install up to 2 cards, creating a new remote server each time. So if you mitosis, like let's say you only have one server actively made, you mitosis to make a new server, and then you can install in your like original server, but you can't put a mitosis card, like your second mitosis trigger just doesn't have a target. If you have no remote servers, then you can get mitosis twice, but you don't get the Ataya trigger. So I don't think they interact with particularly well.
Yeah, so just looking at them, both of them inherently require you to create a second server if there is not one. And mitosis explicitly does require for there to be none. So you can't have anything installed on your remotes. And because you install the first one, then the Ataya trigger happens, and that one doesn't require that there's no other, that you're creating a remote, but the other one does, and this one has to come before it. So yeah, it's a non-bow.
Yeah, it's unfortunately we're not going to be growing any brand new cells, but I do think there's still going to be plenty of options for Ataya. And there's a lot of I saw a lot of people talking about ways that you can kind of use this ID to fast advance, which I think is
I was gonna say that like you can get your 3/2 down and pop down a virus in the same click and break clot lock. You can moon pool 4/2s if you've got enough agendas in hand. You can use fast. You can use what's that card? Thyroid Work Crew, I think, if you're feeling extra spicy and don't want to win too many games.
Yeah, Thyroid Work Crew would be tricky, right?
You'd need Subliminal, I think.
Okay, so yeah, you like install the agenda, get the Thyroid Work Crew, right? Or no? It's very I don't know exactly how Thyroid Work Crew would make
There's
it
probably something
work,
there.
but yeah.
Well, it doesn't. You're installing it, and then you are resing it. You're spending 2 credits to install something else. Like, I guess it lets you install a card into the first server if you need that. Put the Sansan in, 2 extra credits. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's also some options if you can get installs on the runner's turn for this to start doing some silly shenanigans as well.
Unfortunately, we lost advanced assembly. Oops, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Unfortunately, it was advanced assembly lines a couple of rotations ago, but that would have been an amazing combo, I think.
Yeah.
What runner turn installation do we have?
I think Tractor might be it. I forget if Oncel has that clause as well. I believe it does because you can Oncel gank combo.
Drafter, Oncel, Braun, I guess. So yeah, there are a couple.
Timely public release, which is a neutral agenda that works.
Yep. Yeah, timely public release could, I'm always skeptical of obscure 4/2 suddenly becomes playable with new ID release. The other one I've seen people speculating is Jinja plus like a card like Flower Sermon or Spin Doctor. Set up a multi-card combo.
Jinja's interesting because in some sense you're losing a lot of the value, or not losing, but you've already got a lot of the value that Jinja would have given you on the install cost. But that said, if you're drawing and then also installing, maybe you're still saving a click, and Jinja's giving you that click freely. So,
yeah, it's a little bit tricky. I think maybe though we should move on to the asset, because I don't know if this goes in the Ataya deck, but I think it's definitely worth thinking about if it does. So this is the other card we got spoiled from Jinteki today. It is 2 cost, unique, Front Company. It is a asset with 2 important subtypes, one for flavor nerds, one for mechanics nerds. The subtypes are political and seedy. And this says res only during your turn. The first run each turn cannot be made against a remote server. The first time each turn a run on Archives begins if the server is not protected by ice due to net damage. This is 2 influence and 2 to trash out of Jinteki.
So I immediately am drawn towards the art, right? I'm like, yeah, this art, it slaps. And so I go to, as I do, look up what all Mauricio Herrera has done. Oh, hey, it's all of the it's all of the early FFG art that you think of when you think of early Netrunner art. And it rules.
Yeah, Mauricio coming back is great. I mean, I obviously wasn't playing when that art was around, but I think the kind of cartoonish look they have that's still serious, and I think just the emotiveness of all the characters on them. I'm thinking of, Vera slapping the monitor in the new one, but also harkening back to one of my favorite arts on Ash, the HB upgrade. Just a very stern looking Byroid. They're both fantastic, and all of Mauricio's art is.
Yeah,
I've just always loved the
a
variety.
very
So.
fun. Oops, sorry. Yeah, this is a very fun early Netrunner style that it's fun to see come back in. I think having varied art can sometimes be a double-edged sword, but I think when used well, and I think this is a great use of it. It can bring a real flavorful sense to the world that you sometimes don't get if you just are restricted to a single style.
And also the implications just of this picture of this dentist's office that exists for no public patient. Awful. Terrible. I hate it. Give me more.
But we should maybe talk about the mechanics of this card. So this card,
I mean, are you putting this in Ataya? I don't know if I am.
I don't know. It's an interesting thing. So it's like, so what this card does for those people who haven't been playing for a long time, the first run each turn cannot be made against a remote server. Is, I think, basically a concise way of using of the replicating perfection identity, which just kind of says like basically the same thing. Until the runner makes a run on the central server, they can't make a run on the remote. And so that is a kind of classic way that Jinteki used to do click compression. And we've got, I would say, even stronger click compression tools than we had back then. Like replicating perfection would eat its heart out for a border control. And they did overlap, and it wasn't quite as good, but I think that was more a power creep problem than a RP problem. But like
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
that's
I
the
look at
powerful
this
effect.
card. I look at this card and I see an op card immediately. For those wide Arctic Blood style decks. I mean, 2 influence too. You can very easily slot this, and you can kind of rely on the op ability to tutor it too. So it's not like you need to go and spend a lot of them to get it. And so, if you've got this down, you've got a border control in faction, you've got hostile architectures, making it even harder to trash this. It seems like it's going to start just really compounding the prisony clutches.
Yeah, the additional damage is also a good addition. I think it helps defending your weakest central to protecting you from the runner just running through. It's worth mentioning that you don't have to complete the run, which is something maybe people first reading the cards would miss, which I'm pretty sure is how RP used to be, right? You just had to start a run.
Yeah, yeah. So if there was like an unresed ice and the corp didn't res, you could just jack out immediately. So this led to this like really encouraged game plans that involved putting like taxing spiky ice rather than end the run ice, because if it's just like the runner spends a click, runs into an ice wall, like that was something that like runners were able to just make part of their game plan. And like if you have this front company unprotected for its political effect, they bounce to an ice wall and then trash it. Like, yeah, you've come out a little bit ahead of the corp, but also your tool isn't quite there.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a comment from Andre, I think, Pathonymous in Shambles, but I almost think Pathonymous likes to see a card like this. 'Cause here's another reason why you might be ramming into it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Though I will say, like, if front company is rezzed and there's an Iceland archives and the other two centrals, archives might not be my first priority for running. But yeah, so I mean, I think it's interesting to think about this. Like, you guys have labeled this as a potentially an op card, or I see someone, some people in chat talking about in ASA. Do we think that this actually has a place in Ataya, or like like maybe actually let's ask that question a different way. If Ataya was going to use this, what might that deck look like?
I mean, that seems like a PD style rushy deck, maybe, right? Because at worst, this you can't light the fire this because the effect is active, and you'd spend the click anyway. So at worst, this maybe taxes the runner one more click on a turn when you've got an analytic cooking or you've got a border control on your remote, and you can't go and pinhole this either because it's already going to take you the click. So if anything, you're not spending a click to install this. The runner is spending a click to deal with it, and you're ahead on tempo.
With all that being said, though, I think the problem with front company in Ataya, to me at least, is that it clogs your second remote pretty quickly and for a long period of time, maybe. So it's hard to find a way to generate value off of the ID when your plan is to have a very long-term asset and then a scoring remote.
Yeah, totally. I think they're different decks.
Yeah, I also see someone in the chat talking about. I've mostly been thinking about this with Cold Sight and Keeling, because I'm that kind of person. So giving Cror a little shout out. It's actually the Cror, not the King.
Cror, please. I thought you were better than this.
But yeah, I do. That is going to be. I think like maybe you want to be PE and RP at the same time, and this is like in some ways stronger than RP if you can get it rezzed and protected.
The pet card that I am directed towards, I think, is Riot Suppression, in particular with in HB, but I think we're talking about Ataya, so.
But there does happen to be another ID that is also purple that quite likes going wide. So maybe there's a home for it. Last thing I'll say, I guess, just for HB stuff, I think 3 influence is steep, but you might even consider importing fully operational, especially if you're going to be using it for draw, because if you're installing 2 things a turn, you really want to be keeping your hand full of stuff to keep installing. And so the premier ASA card might finally find another home.
Yeah, I would personally love to see that fully op sees playing as many decks as possible. So, Ataya, it seems weird because it's like, oh, your cap is kind of 3 triggers, but honestly, for most ASA decks, that's their effective cap as well. Like your modal, you like usually will get a 2, a 3, and a 4, or sometimes just a 2, a 2, a 3, and a 3. So like it's not that bad, and being able to draw 6 or draw 4, gain 2, like is a nice little modal option. Is definitely something you could think about exploring in Ataya. But yeah, so it sounds like we don't have much more to say about this. It's definitely got a little bit of prison alarms card, but what's an NSG set without a prison? Should we move on maybe to the NBN identity?
Absolutely.
All right. I think this is another exciting ID, and another, I think, pretty good piece of art. This is Epiphany Analytica, Nations Undivided. It is a 45-15 division subtype identity. It says the first time each turn, the runner steals or trashes a corp card, place 1 power counter on this identity. Click Hosted Power Counter. Look at the top 3 cards of R&D. You may install one of those cards.
Let's start by saying that the art is amazing. As I've seen people in the chat call out, the piece is very, very wonderful, and I like the current style, at least, of like corps are made of people too, and they might be evil, and the people in them might be evil as well, but it's different from big scary building that we used to see.
I think there's something to be said, especially coming from the NBN identity, when you like this is a much more presentable, amicable image to have as a corporation, which makes sense for the propaganda, um, faction. I also agree that like the humanization of corpse is good to like, remind yourself that there is still like humans in these corpse, and it's humans doing these awful things, right? But anyway.
Yeah, so in terms of like card effects, no, because I think those points are really well done. Maybe at some point I'll go on a little tangent, but I think like these art, I can't really complain when the art is this good and the execution is so solid. Um, but I think this is a as awesome case as is crying about, but I think I'm very excited about. This seems like it's going to be an ID that supports some level of asset spam, because if you want to get value off.
Yeah, I mean that has been, I think, a looming question mark when I've been thinking about yellow decks going forward. Um, and I'll be honest, this sort of reminded me when I first saw it earlier today of like, hey, here's a kind of weird ability that relies on the runner interacting in this specific way, which is arguably what Pravdivast is or was, which isn't seeing a ton of competitive play. And I think for the current iteration of yellow decks, a lot of that, here you must come interact. You get that from some of the agendas, but you can kind of follow that up with hard hitting news, which is rotating. And well, I'd be shocked if there's maybe not some kind of replacement. If I had to guess, I could see that being quite a good place for the threat mechanic to make an appearance. I do not know of any cards coming, but that seems like an obvious slot. But I guess where I'm going with this is, how do you force the runner to come do something and give you power counters? Because I think sort of the big question Pravdivas had to answer was what's stopping the runner from taking one turn to do all their interaction and then kind of sitting back.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely going to be a continuing question. I think the nice thing, or there's a bit of a difference in where the ideas get strong, where Protivos is like, it feels like it's like just trying to get things set up so that when the runner does interact, there's an immediate trap to try and get them. So you have to be set up for when the runner chooses to interact, which makes Protivos a little bit trickier if the runner is able to interact on turns where you don't have good outlets for your ID ability. You get really hammered. Whereas Epiphany Analytica is like very reactive, where when the runner does go and interact, you can generate some value, and then the question is going to be how can we force interaction and in a way that's beneficial for us as the corp.
Well, at least it triggers on steal, so you are guaranteed to get some triggers during your game. And I think the main point I think the main line we'll see is similar to what CTM used to play, and maybe some tempo NEH lists that have been played throughout the years, where you play assets or upgrades that require some kind of answer, or you win the game, such stuff like multiple bladder words or a red Sun City grid to score out from hand, stuff that the opponent has to contest.
Yeah, and so then I guess a question for you guys is because I think this is an idea ability that's super hard to parse about how good it is. Where are the three of you kind of standing on that, or like how powerful this? Maybe not how good the idea as a whole is, because that's obviously contextual in the meta. But like, how does it feel to do like click hosted power counter, look at the top three?
Yeah, I mean I think the important part of that is not to look at the top three, but also the install being stapled to it. That's kind of a DRM on tap, digital rights management. As long as the runner obviously is interacting or stealing or trashing, which notably does not need to be an installed card. It can just be a card. So, your Stargate, you can maybe break some locks with this ability. But if your agendas are never in your hand, they're going immediately into the remote, no matter where they are in the top three of R&D. That does seem like it could be fairly strong. I think right now the rush shells tend to be Asmari because you have that beacon coming from runners kind of having to play events and you just naming event over and over. But I could see that ability being pretty useful to, force the issue a lot earlier.
With regards to, you mentioned earlier, what's to stop the runner from, compressing all of their steals and trashes into one. There are a couple of ways to approach, like, you can, there's always the possibility that the runner runs at a server intending to see but not trash it, if they can, and it turns out to be an agenda, and suddenly the ID is triggered. And then maybe they'll go and do 3 more runs after that. But if you parse that your opponent is doing this, then you might be able to just like play this sort of like dilated shell game where you just put some agendas naked out on the field and just say, okay, like you have to check them, like
Totally.
so I think that there's a lot of potential behind this ID in the right for someone who really knows how to bluff. Maybe not me, but I can hope.
Yeah, I mean, it's also I think interesting that like there's no once per turn limit on the click to install ability. So if you keep putting out threats and the owner deals with them like one at a time, one at a time, one at a time, you can have an explosive turn where you just like dig through your R&D. Now, admittedly, you're only seeing one card that's new each time, but I imagine there's like most corp decks are designed so that they hit a lot of the time on draws, right? That's the goal is you want to be happy to see most of your cards. And so look at 3 is probably going to be pretty good for you most of the time to just kind of rebuild a pretty explosive board state.
I mean, you can also, if you see 3 things you don't like, you can pop a spin doctor and see a new 3 thing, same turn.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
2 of your 3 clicks, though.
Yeah, but you could also
install, but
yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I think this is going to be to me, this seems like an idea to track. We're going to have to see like what assets come out that like support this ID text, but it definitely is looking to me like an interesting player.
That is sort of what I'm thinking is. I guess we've already seen one, but it sort of begs the question, yes, and what else? What else am I playing in this? Because I think you could certainly imagine particular types of support that would really propel this, but so far we've obviously seen one. You can assume there's more, but I guess we'll have to see what those look like.
Yeah, maybe speaking of that one, we should hop over to that one quickly. We can always jump back to Epiphany Analytica, but we've got balanced coverage, so 1 cost CD asset. When your turn begins, you may choose a card type to look at the top card of You may choose a card type to look at the top card of R&D. If that card has the chosen type, you may reveal it and gain 2 credits. It's 3 to trash and 1 influence.
Let me start off actually by saying something with regards to Epiphany Analytica. One of the best things about the flavor here is that, especially when you're in the setting where people are rioting to protect their rights, right? They are getting benefit off of the damage that is done to property, right? And that's often like very that's often a really big focus on people who are like counter protesters, and that's what we're seeing on balanced coverage, right? Is that act of we will highlight kind of this, we'll highlight what we want, what's advancing our agenda, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
No, that's such a good point. If you can look at all these violent protesters when maybe some people with different ideas are actually the ones breaking things. Yeah, I think the other thing too, the art just made me kind of laugh. I think the flavor is really good, but it's just so unapologetically evil. Finding, but both sides, right? Here are these other people who have this opinion that we happen to share actually. But let's hear what they have to say.
It's definitely, I will say, a very touchy subject. There are a lot of really touchy subjects that are going on here, and I am just appreciative that they're being handled with tact and care. Just bless everybody who's doing the good work over at NSG. Also, shout out to Ferenz for the art. Just done a couple of arts previously. I think my favorite, Hendrik. Finality, though, also very good. Reprise. But yeah, very good, very impactful, I think, especially for a lot of us who now have been exposed to this kind of like social event. Anyway.
I wanted to mention also on the theme of balanced coverage, we haven't talked about too much about the text, but the fact that if you have multiple on the boards, it gets stronger. You don't have to guess anymore. Makes even more sense in the sense that like the more propaganda you get exposed to, the better the effect it has on people. So I feel like it's an extremely team win for this to be even more effective if you have multiples.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good shout, and the kind of like why I expect this card to be played at least at the start. I'm not sure how if it's going to be permanently played, but like in theory, this being better than pad campaign when you hit, if you can just guess on turn one, or if you're Epiphany Analytica and you like set it up properly, like you can know exactly what's there, and this is now better than pad campaign. Yes, it's a credit cheaper to res and a credit cheaper to trash, but that's not necessarily the end of the world. If you can come up with other ways to generate tempo. And again, if you're Epiphany, like, oh yeah, the runner went and got rid of my propaganda, I'll just use it to go and get more propaganda. It's maybe a play pattern that Epiphany really likes.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this and I was like, oh, it's if Public Health Portal was good. And I was actually looking for other cards that share the specific reveal at the start of your turn trigger. I think there's a couple other ones, but then I realized, like what Warlock pointed out, there's no diamond next to that balanced coverage. So I think, if you can start to get a lot of these out, this is a pretty powerful economic engine that needs to be respected and, maybe needs to be dealt with. And there's your sort of gateway into how do I force the runner to interact? Because as soon as you start getting a lot of money, well, then your Sand comes online and you're on your way.
Yeah, I think it's... Oh, go ahead.
Regarding Analytica, like Epiphany Analytica, one thing I'm not looking forward to is keeping like track mentally of what's on top of my deck. That's going to be a bit of a chore.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, there's precedent with Q loop. If you're playing in person, like if you just kind of put the cards like sideways on top of your deck, your opponent.
That's the thing. Q loop is for smart people. I'm not.
No. If you're playing Q loop, I mean that's argue about whether or not you've made a good decision. But and I say that as the biggest Q loop fan.
Oh man,
I think Jeff, you'll know this. There are circumstances in which you actually can keep notes when you're playing competitively. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but I know they exist.
Where you can keep notes was your question?
I think so, right? You can write notes for yourself in the middle of the game.
Yep.
Always.
In all OP events, you can take notes. I think actually, as I'm saying that, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot to put that in the last 5 minutes of a match. Judges may restrict the ability of players to take notes, but I think that's that'll fall under things. But yeah, you're allowed to take notes.
In most circumstances.
Yeah, you're allowed to like use tokens. Or like turn your cards sideways on the top of your deck as a reminder. That's all legal as long as it's clear to you. As long as your overall board state is still clear to your opponent. So
yeah, it has to be, I think, just like one that you and your opponent agree about as well. Like, I don't know what restrictions there are that an opponent would be like, no, you can't turn that card sideways. I would hope that a judge would be like, no, let him turn the card sideways.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question from Xavier in the chat. If the card is the type you choose, do you have to reveal it, or can you say no, decline to reveal it? And yeah, you can decline to reveal. It says if that card is the chosen type, you may reveal it to gain 2. So
that's another bit of it that really plays into the ludo narrative of controlling the message. Wait, that's the wrong. But
What is dead may never die.
what else is NBN like doing thematically in any block? They are the propaganda machine. Let's make some news.
Oh
Totally.
boy.
One. I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but one place I could see this. I mean, this is a stretch, but humor me. It's one influence, and if you're up and you have a Speedagore on the board, you can trigger this before Speedagore, and if you don't like what you see, you can trash something, shuffle your deck, and get a different draw. So you can kind of pseudo filter without your more expensive by one influence daily business show. So probably not good, but it is something you can do.
Well, actually, as you say that, I'm like, oh yeah, Op is always suffering for one cost cards that they can play. Now,
Yeah.
paying an influence for this, maybe not the best, but I could see if you're a heavy asset deck, you could play this name asset. If you hit, great. If you don't, well, it's gonna turn into a Rashida anyway or a Spin Doctor anyway, and that's fine, right? It's just like marginal value upside for very little influence cost.
The other idea of faction where this is probably quite good is Yobu, where you're starved for reveal triggers. So I'm looking for Yobu jank lists that play balance coverage trigger as much as possible.
Yeah, it is going to be a little bit tricky because you only get the reveal if you name it right. So you're going to want some way of setting that up. But maybe this is where Flower Sermon comes in, right? You Flower Sermon trigger at the end of the runner's turn, put a card on top, and then go, I wonder if I can guess correctly which card it is. And you'll get, 2 triggers off of a single Flower Sermon reveal.
What are the odds?
The fifth snare?
how it's just the same snare over and over and over again.
I think the only I don't know if it's because this is at the start of your turn with regards to Hyobu, like just because that says the first time each turn you reveal a card, like I guess you're including it, I suppose, as more options to make sure that you get it. But I feel like I don't know, would most of your reveals be on your turn or on the runner's turn?
Yeah, I guess it's usually
There's
easier.
definitely.
Go ahead.
Good.
Oh no, the Midwestern stream.
It's funny too because I am from the East Coast. I was just gonna say that I can think of, for instance, a gatekeeper reveals things, special offer reveals things, I think, or maybe loot box I'm thinking of. A handful of other ice are out there that reveal things. So yeah, maybe you could proc them on the runner's turn. Probably more often on your own.
I think there's subliminal messaging. Dredge work. Is that the one that shuffles agendas?
Yeah.
Yep.
Search effects. So like gaslight. Trying to think if there are any operations.
Yeah, it is a little bit tricky in Hyobu because, it is much easier. Like basically every ID ever, it's easier to get the triggers on your turn when you have a lot of control, and that's when balanced coverage is also trying to give those triggers. But that said, this is almost strictly just better than public health portals in that it costs 2 less to res and 1 more to trash, and gains the same amount of money if you can guess correctly. So maybe you combine them both and make 4 credits for a 4 res and 5 total trash, or maybe you combine balance coverage with Flower Sermons, or just say my deck is by majority ice right now, so I'll name ice, and sometimes I'll get it I'll win the lottery, and I can stack the odds in my favor.
Is bacterial programming still going to be legal after rotation?
Yes, that's Kitara, I think. Or Ren Reverie, maybe even?
It's Katara.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's
I mean, I don't know. I'm looking at this, and I think the question I wonder if it will be able to answer is but why not the other preeminent 1 cost, give me money, 3 trash Splatterwort that is not in faction? But maybe all of a sudden, if you start having these money making assets in yellow, your influence is freed up to focus on other things that when you eventually do force the runner to interact, your answers are a lot stronger. So I'm excited to see cards like this being printed.
Yeah, I do feel like, if CTM could play this, it would think about playing these over Bladderworts. I don't know that it would be a snap decision, but like oh yeah, I can drip for 2 or 4 or 6, depending on how lucky I am and smart I am, is like a really significant thing. And also, like, interesting with this, with something like DBS, is you can like name an agenda DBS and then put the card unknown, because DBS moves them to an unknown zone, the runner won't know whether or not you actually kept the agenda or not that you showed them for a bunch of money. So that's definitely going to be there is some reason to combine this with some other, historically strong yellow assets. But I think we've talked about this card for quite a bit, so maybe I'll wrap back now that we've talked about today's spoilers and a little bit about some of the other spoilers. I guess maybe what each of you are most excited about so far, and maybe I'll start with Mondi.
Ooh, buddy. All the identities, the Ludo narrative. I'm just all about it. Just real quick because it was not an identity that was spoiled today. Arasana. In the story that Arasana is revealed, she comments that I could pay money to the university to display my art to, maybe 50 people, or I can tag political prisoners on the back of a police van and everybody's going to see it. And that's represented so well in just this mechanic of your art lasts longer if it's on the corpse. Like, if the corp is carrying your message, that lasts longer, right? I just think it's such shoe flower. Just, I'm making like the chef fingers.
Mm-hmm. All right, Wentagon, how about you? What's the thing you've maybe most interested in
Oh
at the time
man,
being?
it's such a good question. I mean, I am a Shaper apologist. I will be delighted when the Shaper haters are have reason to complain again. So I have to, of course, comment that the console and the ID really excite me. But I think actually, if I had to pick one thing, I think the new mechanic threat is such a. I mean, they said this in the mechanics article too. It seems so obvious that it should have been in Netrunner for the longest time, but I do really think it opens up ways to design cards that have nuance in when they spike in power, but aren't oppressive right from the start or aren't useless at the start either. And I think it just is a really cool design space that's totally unexplored. And I love to see that NSG is still turning out new ways to take the game mechanics in different directions.
Yeah, I might actually circle back and get everyone's opinions on threat, but I want to give wowarlok also a quick thing to go in about what you're most excited about so far. 3 days in, so hard committed to whatever you're enjoying the most at the moment.
Best cards in the set then, because we have only seen these ones, but they're definitely by far the best for sure. No, but I'm not serious. I'm excited for both corp IDs. I feel like they provide new puzzles that we haven't seen yet in the game, and building them is going to be a lot of fun. Like, I'm excited to get brewing on all the possibilities that both the new Gintech and the UNBN IDs provide, and see what's the best path for both, which ones end up being more exciting, more functional, or even like the most fun play. So that's it for me.
Cool. So actually, I'm gonna ask a different hard question. I was initially gonna ask like, oh, some people feel like it's weird to have the mechanic both be a snowball and a catch-up mechanic all in one. But I think that's good. Like, whether or not that actually manifests is going to depend a lot on what the threat cards we actually have are. So I guess I might say, if there's a card you would want to see given some kind of threat clause from any previous version of Netrunner, or a card that you've just been in your custom creation folder, is there one that you immediately are like, oh, I'd love to see a threat version of X?
What? You can't just do this to me. Yeah, what? I'm just thinking about threat, and you hit me with this. Hang on. All right. I guess I am still thinking about threat, but
Yeah, I
what
guess
the?
maybe we could go with the easier question of what are your
No, I'm
thoughts on
fine. I
threat
just need a
overall?
second to think
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it.
No, it's all
I
good.
Well,
have
I already
somewhat of...
kind of alluded
Oh,
that I would love to see a threat version of hard hitting news make return to the game. It I that was the card that I hated when I started playing. Second only maybe to Apocalypse, and now I've come to terms. We've had discussions. We've worked it out. But I really do think it's a sort of effect that needs to exist for a good dynamic to exist between corps and runners. And maybe it could be revisited with the sort of added nuance of threat. So that would be my pick for a print with threat.
I'm just thinking about the possible ways that this can be used. Like, I'm curious what a threat X card would look like. I'm curious about because I'm like a trace apologist, right? And the one thing that I think really shines is when trace is scalar. Maybe it's not been implemented correctly historically, but in concept. So this like scaling from early to late game and changing up. I kind of want to see cards that actually get weaker as the game goes on, just to balance out, like you're saying, this win more kind of mechanic. Like you're, what do I want to say? Like, it's complicated. Like if you get to threat level 4 by stealing 2/3/2s off the top, like that's making your cards more powerful, but the corpse also getting more powerful as well. So maybe that's enough. I assume that the playtesters considered this because it's a pretty big question.
yeah. Monde stole my answer of a card that gets weaker off of threat. So that would have been what I wanted to say. But I think one space where I would like to see threat is on defensive agendas. Either turning the defensive mode off in the late game, so all bets are off. Once you reach threat 4, all your agendas are good to go. Or being easier to steal early on and then becoming the hard to steal protective agendas later. Like for example, the Obokata becoming dealing damage only when you're on threat 4 or only when you're below threat 3, something like that.
Yeah, I think
or maybe
I've
one
seen...
that even like flips modality, like what maybe like SDS type effect where you trash the program or something, but early on in the game it's offensive, later on it's a cost to steal or something.
Yeah, I think that those are all interesting spaces. I was gonna say also, yeah, I've seen people talking about Obo both for either saying it should only do damage at high threat or it should only do damage at low threat. And I think that's one of the really interesting things that could be a lot of fun about threat mechanic, the design space, is that like both of those options could be right and could even be right in different decks. So I like it's a way that you could kind of expand things out, and I'm hoping that we see some pretty kind of exciting and innovative threat stuff in the future. I would say the two cards we've seen so far are definitely interesting, but it feels more like it's like, oh, this card's like a little bit niche and wouldn't scale into the late game, so we're just going to give it a little bit of a scaling pump to make it a little bit more impact, like kind of keep up with the curve of the game. And I hope that we see threat do more than kind of just the keep scaling, keep scaling with the pace of the game. Though I think that's also a cool way to, especially when Hank was talking about like an HHN, that might be a way to make the early game less punishing for the runners, but still feel like a card you want to include in your corp decks.
All right, hear me out. Obokata. Threat 2, and it has its regular text. Threat 5. Ignore that last bit. What if Obokata's only dangerous in the mid game?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I also I will say one of the really interesting things is like a threat 2 versus a threat 3 versus a threat 4 all feel like, and maybe even a threat 5 all feel like very, very different to me. So I'll be interested to see where these different threat levels land, because they're going to mean very different things about the types of decks that want to use those cards on the corp side, and how
So Jeff, let me
when stuff
ask
turns
you a
on.
question.
Okay.
Can you spoil for us the highest threat number in the set?
I think I would get thrown in Nisei jail if I got, or sorry, not wow. Now I'm getting thrown in null signal jail for multiple reasons. But no, I can't say what the highest threat number is unless someone can find it in an article somewhere.
It,
But
I'm guessing. I want to say someone went spicy and put a 6 in there.
I would love to see a
After
6.
after Super Deep Borehole, the Ludo narrative champion of Parhelion, I'm betting I'd put money on Threat 6. I want to see.
I wanna see Blackfile with threat 8.
I also want to see Threat 1.
a black file with threat 8 is kind of cool, where it's like, yeah, at threat 8, this card gets trashed, you lose or something, like, I don't know, or yeah, it just gets trashed, I guess, and then whoever got to 8 wins. It would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I was saying though. There's so much untapped design space that you can do with this, and I think it's awesome that it's finally getting explored.
Yeah, I will say, as someone who's been doing custom card creation on some of my regular Wednesday streams, it's like, oh good, I've known about this mechanic for a long time. I can finally go back in and fit it in a bunch of places where it makes sense.
Finally, oh,
Yeah.
I've been typing out all this placeholder text for nothing. Jeez.
Yeah, trying to, it's like, okay, how can I make this effect scale without using the scaling keyword that is in my brain? Like, but yeah, I'm excited.
Just tiny scoop.
I'm excited to see what we get from Null Signal, and I'm sure that this threat's going to be all over custom card creations in the foreseeable future, because it does just feel like such a, like it we'll have to see how it lands in actual play, but it certainly feels like one of those effects that we're like, wait, this hasn't been here the whole time, which I think is a really cool place for a mechanic for a game that is over a decade old at this point to kind of discover.
As so, in other card games, right, you would call this a, oh god, I don't even remember, but it's different because it's not like it's keywording the circumstances leading to the ability, but the ability itself is not keyworded. And for the most part, like, it's really difficult to do that in the LCG model, I want to say, just because like you're printing fewer unique cards, and so you want them to be more unique. Not to say, I mean, Sabotage slapped, Mark slapped, Charge slapped. Yeah, it's just so elegant, though, in just what it represents, how it asks you to refer to the game state, and yeah, it really is like, how did no one think of this?
Oh, cool. We're getting close to the top of the hour, so I want to start wrapping us up. So I want to say thank you to Mondi, Wentagon, and wowarlok. Thank you all for coming on. It's been great to chat with you about these cards. And I want to give you all any shot for closing thoughts before we sign off for the night.
Thanks for having me on after I submitted my application like a day late. And to boot, 2 identities really is Scoopsmiths. But no, just really glad to be on, really enjoying the streams, looking forward to the next ones. And if y'all for some reason are in the chat and haven't been watching AMT when it happens, y'all should take some time to watch some AMT.
Yeah, the AMT has been great. It's been super great that people have been showing up, and I'm super thankful to you for casting so many of them, and for people in the audience. If you're interested in casting future AMTs, they're going to resume in September. The AMTs, the Accelerated Meta Tests, they're online monthly events that we've been running as Null Signal games, and we're shifting time zones. The September one is going to be primarily for an APAC time zone. So for the couple of you that are waking up really early to watch this in the morning, that one should be lined up well for you. But yeah, I guess Hank and wowarlok, any final words?
I'll just say thanks for having me on. It was awesome to talk with all you all. And I will say, go play in Continentals. If you're already playing on it, great. If you're thinking about it on the fence, play in Continentals. If you've never played in a tournament before, play in Continentals, especially Cascadia. I have to plug that. I'm actually moving to the West Coast just in time for Cascadia. So anyone going to that, I'll see you out there. But in all seriousness, new set, new cards, it'll be great. If you've never played before, play anyway. It's really fun to come to your first big Netrunner tournament, and if you're thinking about Cascadia, it's really shaping up to be a fantastic event. So hope to see some of you all there.
And I should say, this has been plugged a lot on our socials, so thanks to Mike for doing that work. But we will have the new pack available to sell there with currently, I think, planned more copies than people. So please do, if you can, plan on picking up your copy there. That way you don't have to worry about it getting shipped to you or getting lost in the mail. Just be able to show up, buy the pack, and start playing right away. So I think it'll be great to be able to buy them from a retailer for the first time in quite a while with some Netrunner cards.
Yeah, well, as for me, as a Bob, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful, and since I'm from Europe, I don't think I'll be attending Cascadia, but I'll hopefully see as many as you can as to Worlds this year. So hopefully, many people travel there.
That reminds me, I have one more thing to plug.
Oh yeah, go right ahead.
Run Together 2023 is available now. If you go to nearearthhub.net, at the top there will be a little header that says Run Together Fundraiser. There's something in here as well about group buys that I'm maybe gonna see if I can do. Maybe it would benefit you as well. But pick up some cool alt arts and help some people get to Worlds.
Yeah, thanks. These have all been great plugs. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming on. It's been a great and very fun chat. And thanks to everyone in the stream chat. It's always good to see people chatting, giving their opinions. And I look forward to tomorrow, where I think the first couple days are always kind of a drip, 1 or 2 cards from NSG, and then it tends to be a lot of the majority of cards go out to content creators. So we'll see what tomorrow brings. I think it's supposed to be a somewhat busy day, so I'm excited to see what we got, and yeah, excited to see the rest of the set come together in public. So with that, thank you once again to the guests. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I will see you all tomorrow.
Thanks again.
Bye.